Hi, all. Good to see you. Well, we have a strong showing of the steering committee and some familiar faces and a couple of new faces. Hi, Debbie Schwank. I hear you're from Caldwell, New Jersey, and this is your first time. Yes? We'll find something for you to do.
Okay, thanks, I think.
Anybody else new? Is there anybody else I haven't seen before? It's hard to scroll through this whole thing. Good. Well, let's get started because there's a lot on the agenda tonight. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our familiar and our new faces. I'm Rabbi Devorah Lynn, co-founder with Dr. Mirala Goldsmith of Jewish Earth Alliance here in Washington, D.C. It's a national network of Jewish groups, large and small, developing relationships with your members of Congress and calling on them to act on climate. And I realized today our first Capitol Hill delivery of your letters, Mirala and I, was May, and a couple of other people came as well, was May 14th, 2019. So we're celebrating 5 years ago, 5 years just last week. And maybe we need a little bit of internet confetti thrown or something like that. So I'm very proud of how far we have come in only 5 years and how we have really made a name for ourselves. And the best compliment is how we've been imitated. So please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and any affiliation that brought you here tonight and where you're located tonight. And if this is your first time joining us for a meeting or action, and I didn't get you, thank you, Bill, for the little bit of confetti. I'm technologically not very wise. If this is your first meeting, let us know. So let me get started and introduce our first speaker. We always have somebody to open our meeting with some Torah, and our first speaker will offer us some spiritual inspiration for our meeting. Rabbi Nate DeGroot was ordained at Hebrew College in 2016, and he served as the spiritual and program director at Hazon, now called Adamah, in Detroit. And he was the first rabbinic fellow at Ikar, a synagogue pretty famous now, with Rabbi Sharon Brous in Los Angeles. He's currently associate director for the Shalom Center, where he is supporting the future planning and rollout of the organization's new strategic vision. Rabbi Nate humbly anticipates succeeding Rabbi Arthur Waskow as director of the Shalom Center in October of this year. Congratulations, Nate, on your stepping into the shoes of our inspiration and partner in climate, Rabbi Waskow. A great honor for you and Jewish Earth Alliance to have you back as our guest tonight. Please offer us some Torah.
Thank you, Rabbi Devorah. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Mirala, for the now many-year partnership and collaboration from the days of Hazon through the days of the Shalom Center. Great to be here with you all. So as many of you might know, we are in a period on the Jewish calendar known as the Omer, counting the Omer. I know it was in the email announcement about this meeting, so some of you might be familiar with it. Anyone know what an Omer is? We're counting an Omer, but what's an Omer? Anyone know? You can unmute and share if you, anyone know what an Omer is?
Come on.
I think it's an amount of grain.
Perfect. Yeah. So an Omer itself is a unit of measurement. Okay. So like we have a cup or a liter or a quart or something like that. It's a unit of measurement. And in the case of counting the Omer, it pertains to grain. Like most of our Jewish holidays and the Jewish calendar as a whole, this tradition is rooted in the agricultural cycles and the cycles of nature and the seasons. At Passover, our ancient agrarian ancestors would plant their grain, and supposedly or symbolically, it would take 7 weeks to grow. And by the time 7 weeks had passed, and we were on the precipice of Shavuot, the holiday that commemorates the revelation of Torah at Mount Sinai, the grain would grow. In the Torah itself, fun fact, there's no Shavuot as revelation of Torah at Mount Sinai. Shavuot is also a harvest festival. It's when the priests would take the grain, the first fruit of the grain that had grown over the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, and they would grind it up and turn it into bread, and they would bake some loaves of bread and offer it at the altar, that hold it up in the air. And that was the original Shavuot. The Torah revelation piece was only added later, as was the layers of meanings on counting the Omer. So I don't know how many of you, if any, planted grain at Passover and have been tending it and watering it and watching it grow. I have not, although some of you may have planted other things around that time in your gardens. So what is the point of the Omer if we're not actually growing grain ourselves? These 7 weeks have really taken on a life of their own as a opportunity for spiritual and personal growth, right? 7 weeks, 7 is a symbolic number in Judaism, 7 days of the week, 7 as a kind of number of wholeness and completion. So 7 cycles of 7. Some of you might be familiar with the sabbatical, 7 years, the Jubilee, 7 cycles of 7 years, 49 years. So these are the kind of microcosms and macrocosms of sevens on our calendar. This is 7 weeks of 7 days for 49 days, similar to 7 sabbaticals of 49 years in the Jubilee. Different people have different customs and traditions around counting the Omer. The basics are, and I know you'll get a chance to do this at the end of the meeting, is to say a blessing and to count what day it is, literally to say, today is the blank day of the Omer, this many weeks, this many days. That in and of itself is a practice, just trying to remember to do something for 49 days straight. I say that in jest a little bit, but also really not. It's actually quite a disciplined spiritual practice to remind yourself or set your alarm every night and remember to actually follow through on doing it when it goes off, or downloading one of the apps on the app store that you can get to make it helpful, or commissioning an artist to make a really beautiful Omer counter for you. But I think the other piece, which is what I really want to lift up tonight, is that even though we might not be growing grain, we do take small actions in our life on a daily basis with the hope that they amount to significance. I think it can be incredibly challenging to feel hope, to feel like progress is being made, progress towards what, the topic of tonight's call is progress was made and now it's being threatened to be backpedaled, right? Even when we experience a victory or feel like we're moving forward or have achieved some kind of win, it's not safe, right? We don't even know that it's going to hold up. And so how do we kind of build the resilience within ourselves to continue to try to make an impact, to make change? I see, Rachel, you're nodding. I know you're a very lively and committed day in, day out, activist yourself. I'm sure many of you on this call, and many of you have been doing it for a lot longer than I have. How to stay in the game, how to continue to push forward when things feel challenging. And the Omer, I think, is a really helpful and meaningful ritual opportunity for us to cultivate that kind of resiliency and that kind of hope, and to see the results of our work. One of the practices of the Omer period is to not cut one's hair or shave one's body, which I am taking part in. I'm not typically quite this bushy of beard and head, and it's related to something that's not super relevant to this part of the conversation, but the meaning of why we do it in the first place. The rabbis actually consider this period a period of mourning to a certain extent. But what I've found in now practicing this for, I don't know, 12 years or so, every Omer period, day in and day out, you don't really notice the growth of hair. I certainly don't. I don't wake up in the morning and say, wow, my hair really grew a lot from last night, right? It's this kind of imperceptible change and growth and lengthening that if you're thinking about it every day and measuring it every day, it's basically imperceptible. But one morning, it actually just happened a couple days ago, I woke up and I was like, oh, wow, my hair's gotten long, my beard's gotten long. Normally, this is the time I would go in for a haircut or a shave. And all of a sudden, the change, the growth that might not be perceptible on a daily basis is actually perceptible when you zoom out or once you've had a bit of time to reflect. And the message, I think the lesson here for us is to take the steps every day with the belief that change will happen. And when we don't experience the results that we want the first day or the second day or the third day, to really remember this Omer period and the lesson that it teaches us. Actually, sometimes change takes a while. In this case, 49 days, 7 weeks, right? In other cases, maybe much longer for some bills that you all have been working on for years, or in some cases, maybe much shorter. But I want to really just leave you all with a blessing for koach, for strength and resilience and emunah of faith to continue to do the work that you're committed to doing, that your heart believes in and your spirit knows is right, even when the change is hard to see on a day-to-day basis, to know that with the work that you're doing in the weeks and months of commitment and really showing up, that change is possible. So thank you again for having me. I hope it's a meaningful Omer period for each of you, and that we all get to stand together at Sinai on Shavuot with a haircut and some really big wins.
Amen and amen. Hey, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for that blessing. And may you have a long and healthy future with the Shalom Center. Mazel
Thank
tov.
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So now I'd like to turn the floor over to Rabbi Melanie Aaron from our steering committee. And she will brief us this evening on upcoming events for the summer. Melanie.
Right. Well, I want to thank Rabbi DeGroot as well for his teaching. And remember also that the Shalom Center, and particularly Rabbi Wasko, was very instrumental in bringing Eco Kosher to the attention of the American Jewish community. So we wish you well in following in his footsteps. Our lobby day is coming up once again. We have set it for August 8th, Thursday. It's not the actual day of Tisha B'Av, that is August 13th, but it's during the 9 days when we think about the seriousness of the dangers and the potential for destruction. Tisha B'Av itself is a day of prayer and fasting, so it was worked out better for us to do our lobby day around Tisha B'Av. The official kickoff for our summer lobby day will be June 1st. But we encourage you to put August 8th on your calendar right now so that it's there and secure. I don't need to tell you that there's a lot of frustration right now with Congress. It's not clear how much they will accomplish between now and August, or what they will accomplish between August and the election. But our lobbying efforts remain important for two reasons. First of all, it is relationship building with our senators and with our staff, with their staff. And secondly, we do want to address legislation that will come to the floor and to influence our elected officials. As of now, in particular, we are focusing on various pieces of legislation being proposed about improving the energy transmission. We are assessing which of the bills is likely to be the most successful, and then we and other environmental organizations will stand behind them. It is also likely that we will be fighting attempts by Senator McConnell and others to pass legislation to undo those better air standards that we finally got through the EPA. So we do need to be on guard. Success is not just achieving something, but also safeguarding it. Finally, we are watching the Farm Bill. Presently, there is some action in the House. It's not clear that lobbying in the Senate will be the most meaningful thing to do on the Farm Bill. It may be more important to write to our House members, but we will be staying on top of that situation and figuring out what is necessary for August. Just one last reminder. 60% of the Jews in the United States live in 5 states. Those states are, it's no surprise, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, and California. And so if you live in those states, we really want you to sign up, and we appreciate your involvement. But even more, if you don't live in one of those states, or you have a friend or a relative who lives in a state that's not on that short list that I just shared, please, please, please encourage them to sign up, because many of the senators who are key to the legislation that we care about don't happen to come from the 5 states where all the Jews live. So August 8th, put it on your calendar, watch for the sign-up material. It will get to you actually just after June 1st being Shabbat, but we will be reaching out and we hope that you will be responding. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Melanie. And our lobby days have been so exciting and just so worthwhile. And we're doing them, what is it, twice a year on a regular basis now. So that's just fantastic. And if you have a second place to go to, if you have a second home in another state that is not in one of those 5 states, or you know somebody who has a second home, please see if you invite them to come and learn how to lobby and lobby with us. That would be terrific. All right, so thank you, Melanie, and stay tuned for coming attractions on that note. So tonight, our main speaker, David DeGennaro, has a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's in environmental science, and began his time on Capitol Hill working for Congressman Ron Kind of Wisconsin, working extensively on climate, agriculture, and public lands issues. He is now the Senior Policy Specialist for Climate and Energy at the National Wildlife Federation, one of our close working friends and partners, the nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C. His work spans a range of clean energy, generation technologies, clean fuels, nature-based climate solutions, and climate adaptation. And he's in front of an absolutely exquisite mountain, but still in DC, the miracle of Zoom. And he's going to explain to us or deepen our knowledge about our action alert this month on the Congressional Review Acts. Thank you, David, for joining us tonight.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be with you all tonight. And I'm really glad that you're digging into these issues and learning more and contributing to the dialogue here in Washington, D.C. It's really important to get those outside voices. And so, yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit more about, some of the wins that Rabbi DeGroot just talked about and how they are potentially going to be threatened in the coming months and how we might try to maintain the progress that's been made. It's true that we've had a remarkable past couple of years in terms of progress on important legislation and regulations on climate. We passed the first ever major climate bill, which had hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in climate and adaptation and mitigation. And the Biden administration came in from day one, really making it a priority and trying to really revolutionize the federal government and its policies towards climate change. So we want to make sure that we don't slide backwards no matter what happens this November. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple slides with you all as we discuss. Oops. Great. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about tonight is the Congressional Review Act. It's the mechanism by which Congress can decide whether or not to let regulations passed by an administration stand. So some facts about that and features of that law. It was passed in 1996, again, giving Congress the opportunity to weigh in on regulations passed by an administration. Congress passes the laws, and then it's up to the federal agencies to implement those laws. And Congress felt that it needed an opportunity to weigh in and decide if the agencies were doing the right job as was intended by Congress. So how they do this is the House and/or the Senate will introduce a joint resolution of disapproval. It's called a joint resolution because it has to pass both the House and the Senate. and showing that they disapprove of the regulation at hand. It has to be filed within 60 legislative days of finalization of the rule. So that's not just 60 calendar days, it's 60 days that both chambers are in session. So if either the House and or the Senate are adjourned for more than 3 days, then that extends the clock for that 60 days. So it's not just 2 months after the finalization of the rule, based on how long Congress will be in session. Like this year with the election coming, they're going to be out of session for much of August, September, October, and then again after the election. So the window for that is really at this point coming up pretty soon. We think it's early June, depending on how things shake out. So why that's significant is because the joint resolution requires a majority vote in both the House and Senate, so you can't filibuster in the Senate. You don't need that 60 vote threshold. And it also needs to be signed by the president. So the president is able to veto these if they pass both the House and Senate. So that's not a problem right now because obviously President Biden would veto things that threaten his own regulations. But come election time, if there's a new administration that's voted in, that's when this becomes a real issue. Because if the administration changes, then the next president can let those things go through without that promise of a veto. So that's why we're looking at this current window coming up. And that's why the Biden administration rushed to get out a bunch of these regulations before the end of May so that they would be safe from that 60-day period. But if the resolution is passed and it's signed by the president, it nullifies the rule in its entirety as if it never existed, but it also precludes any future substantially similar rule. So for instance, if the power plant rules that were just implemented regulating carbon emissions from power plants, if the CRA were to be successful, it would prevent EPA from putting in place new regulations to replace it. They essentially wouldn't be able to regulate carbon emissions from power plants in the same way. So that's a huge problem, in addition to just the rule that we're talking about. And so, as I mentioned, this was passed in 1996. It was first successfully used a few years later, but then it's become increasingly frequently used in the most recent Congresses. 16 times after President Trump was elected, Republicans pushed through these CRAs, and he signed them, and then 3 additional times in the last Congress from 2021 to 2022. This increasing threat comes because of course, the political polarization of our nation, as we've seen it grow. Political gamesmanship where a new administration wants to stick it to the last one and really undo a lot of the work that they did. And also, perhaps primarily, it's just a lot easier to go through this process than to go through an agency process. When an agency promotes a regulation, they have to go through a long science-based, fact-based process with public comment to show why the action that they're taking is justified and beneficial to the country. And so for a new administration to go and undo that, they have to go through the same sort of process to justify that this change is actually necessary, that the previous rule was wrongfully implemented, and that the new option will be better for the country. So if you can just get 50 votes in the Senate and have the president sign it, that's a lot easier than that long process. So as for the current Congress, there have been CRA votes on dozens of issues in the House and Senate on all kinds of things, including the environmental issues, consumer protections, financial regulations, you have it. But again, only a few of them have passed both the House and the Senate and made it to the president's desk. The ones in the environmental space, there are 2 of them related to Endangered Species Act protections for animals. There was a Waters of the United States definition contained in the Clean Water Act, which has been a longstanding fight, and then air pollution from heavy-duty vehicles. All of them were vetoed by the president. But there are several other regulations that we care about in the air and climate and public health space that have recently been finalized. So those are relating to methane rules for oil and gas operations, both producing the methane at the wellhead, and then also regulating it throughout their supply chain. There was a standard for particulate matter, which is a key component in smog. As I mentioned, the carbon dioxide rule for power plants, and then pollution from cars and trucks, which those rules were incredibly impactful, regulating carbon dioxide from vehicles for the first time, and really getting us standards that will move us to pollution-free vehicles in the near future. So hopefully these are safe because they have been finalized already, and the 60-day period will expire before the end of the administration. But that's not necessarily a given. Again, depending on how many days Congress stays in session, that period may be longer than we're expecting, or something, there could be enough of a groundswell, potentially, if these pass the House and the Senate, that the president might feel some pressure to sign. So it's never a sure thing.
Before you, on the first three, you said those, the CRAs went through?
They passed both the House and the Senate, and so the president had to veto those.
Oh, and the president vetoed them. And it doesn't seem possible that it could be overridden.
No. And that's because you only need 50 votes in the Senate to pass them, but you would need the 2/3 majority to override a veto. So that's a much higher bar.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Great question. So why it's important for us to stay engaged, even though these may potentially be okay. As has been mentioned earlier, I mean, it's important to keep building relationships and keep making sure that your voices are being heard. This helps keep the members engaged on the issues, so that they don't say, oh, it's been taken care of, it's done, we don't have to worry about it, and keep them accountable, because you want to make sure that your members of Congress are voting in the way that you would hope that they would. In addition, it helps build the case for future legal challenges, because we know that all of these rules are most likely going to be challenged in court based on coming from the relevant industries and others. And the courts will look to these votes and see how many people vote, how many members of Congress voted to pass the Review Act, what was the legislative history, what kinds of statements were they making on the floor to support that the regulation is not what Congress intended. And so you need as many members as possible to vote the right way, and to say publicly why they're voting that way. The best way to help them do that is to really tell them your story. Members of Congress get thousands of letters and calls on any given issue, especially when it's high profile like these. And a lot of them are just form letters, like the ones that NWF will send to our members, and they'll get hundreds of those. They're just they're not counted individually. Oftentimes, they're just sort of a check that this message came through. But it's different when you personalize it and tell a little bit more about why you care about this issue, and why it's important enough to let you take the action to write in. So whether that's personal story about you or a relative has asthma and is really affected by poor air quality like smog, or if you live in a community that's being impacted increasingly by severe weather or coastal flooding or something, whatever it may be that motivates you, get that across. And those are the types of letters that will make it past the staff and actually get put in front of the member of Congress themselves. And if those types of compelling stories are the ones that the members will take to a committee hearing and will read it out and put it in the record, or take it to the floor and read it to their colleagues there so that they can share the importance of this. And in that way, you may be able to give them not just motivation, but also ammunition for doing the right thing. And then, of course, it's always, the basic is to vote. We want representatives that represent our values, and encouraging us and our friends and our relatives in other places to do the same is really the first step. So I think that's all that I had, but thank you all very much for your time and attention. And now I'd love to be able to answer any questions. I'm just going to leave that up for a minute longer in case anyone's taking down my email address.
Yeah, thank you, David, for that very concise explanation of something that appears complex machinations of Congress, but you really clarified that for us. We do have a few questions. Mirla, why don't you ask your questions, okay? You had a couple.
Thank you very much for explaining that. It is hard to understand why we work so hard for a rule and it passes and gets put in place, and then all of a sudden it's in jeopardy again. So I had two really quick questions. One is, how long does it preclude a future rule from being passed? Is this forever? Like they could never pass another substantively similar rule? And the second, are there any important rules that are still in the works that have to be finalized? And what's the deadline for them to be finalized to be more or less safe from being overturned?
Yeah, great questions. I meant to get to the second one in my talk. So the most of the major ones that we've been tracking have already been finalized. I think there may be still some lingering out there, but the administration did make a big push to get these through so that they would be shielded from the window. But again, that window is a very fuzzy thing, so there's no date certain. If, I think projecting based on the congressional calendar that has been published so far, the date was sort of early to mid-June. But if they decide to, they're not getting anything done, they want to leave earlier to start campaigning, and they cut back those days, and that will open the window further. And additionally, one thing I forgot to mention, so if a new administration is voted in, there's and if any regulations have not completed their 60-day window, the next Congress will have a 15-day window to continue to have the opportunity to file the motions. So even even this could extend into next year, depending on how that all shakes out. And then on your first question, according to the text of the law, yeah, there's no end date on that. There is some question about what substantially similar means and what qualifies as a substantially similar rule. So I think the courts have ruled in various ways on that. So that's a bit of an open question. Clearly, you can't pass the exact same rule or something that does, the same thing, but in a slightly different way. But in the case of the power plant example, again, could you come up with some other way to regulate CO2? I think that would be challenging because they already had to sort of redo the Obama era regulations that were thrown out by the Supreme Court. So this is already the second attempt at how to do this, and they had a challenge in getting there. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Bill Witherspoon from our steering committee says, so McConnell's proposal could pass the Senate this session with 50 votes, but wouldn't Biden be able to veto any bill from the current Congress?
Correct. And so that's why this is really a concern when around a potential change of administration. And that's why the date by which these were finalized is important. So those that were finalized more than 60 legislative days ahead of the new Congress, those Biden has the opportunity to veto. But any that are finalized after that window could potentially be considered voted on after Biden leaves office, and the next administration would have the opportunity to allow them to sign them into law.
Yeah, boy, pretty precarious.
Yeah.
And Mirla is saying, we got a great response from a representative saying they appreciate that we shared how our faith influences our perspective. Do you find that that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Faith is at the very core of many people's daily lives and values, and members of Congress are often the same way. And so that definitely resonates with them. And again, it's a great way to personalize your experience and to the point that you're trying to get across.
Yeah, I think in the National Climate Assessment, they call it the trusted voices, people in the military, people with in different religious backgrounds.
Yeah,
So, and that's part of telling us our personal story. And we get that question a lot about why should I write to my congressperson? They're all on board, and they tell us, Jamie Raskin told us, that he takes our personal stories to influence resistant colleagues, and he's on so many important committees, so that's very important. Let's see, Elliot Rabin is saying, since the Dems have 51 in the Senate, yeah, how are the Republicans able to get a majority against these regulations?
yeah, another great question that I had meant to get into my presentation. So thank you for asking. Yeah, it's not a given that everyone in the party is going to agree. We have our favorite senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, who is often on the other side of environmental regulations like these. But even other Democratic senators from states like Pennsylvania or Michigan, for instance, may be tempted to vote for these because they have certain constituencies in their state or certain industries, like in Pennsylvania is very heavily natural gas. So it's not always an easy vote, and oftentimes the opposition party will choose the issues that are most likely to split Democrats apart. So yeah, they have been successful on a few occasions.
Pardon us. Did you want to say?
No, I think doing the same as you. Was going to point to Susan for the next question.
Yeah, Susan. Yes. Can you unmute?
Hi, thank you for explaining this. It is confusing, but it is also motivating. That I'm a little bit concerned that can it be a matter of linguistics, just to write it in such a way that it sounds different, but it's really doing the same thing. When something doesn't pass, is it just? Can you give an example of? Is there a time where something didn't pass and it got rewritten and it did pass?
In terms of legislation or?
Yeah.
I think you're saying there was the Obama, something from Obama.
Yeah, well, that was the Obama attempt to write regulations around carbon dioxide from power plants, and that was invalidated by the Supreme Court. And so, basically they saw the Obama rules as trying to phase out fossil fuel plants in favor of wind and solar. And the Supreme Court said you can't regulate an industry out of existence. You can only, the Clean Air Act only allows you to regulate what happens within the fence line of a power plant itself. So the Biden administration took the approach of regulating emissions from specific power plants and lowering the amount of emissions that they are allowed to emit, and to the degree that they could only continue to emit. The only plants that would be able to operate at that point would be wind and solar, or fossil fuels with carbon capture and sequestration. And so it's trying to get at the same end result, but by the means that's allowed under the law.
And it sounds like it's also trying to stop it from going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court gave them the guidelines of how they could write a regulation. So they took that and sort of, jiggered it into that framework that they had been given from the court.
And the CRAs apply only to regulations, not legislation, right?
Correct.
So I'll end the questioning. Mirala says, I'd like some encouragement. What do you think is the most important thing for climate that happened in the past few years that we should share with others?
Well, certainly the biggest action that Congress took was passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which had those hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for clean energy, for energy efficiency, for clean vehicles, for clean school buses, investments in clean manufacturing. It really was transformative, and we've already seen the difference just in 2 years of how much more investment has been made in this country around those industries, both bringing those industries here onshore, creating new jobs in communities all around the country, and really reducing emissions. The share of renewable energy generation has continued to climb to new heights. We produce more energy from renewable sources now than coal, and that share is rising all the time. So that's really the biggest single action. And that also will come under threat if the Congress goes to Republicans. The Republicans, that legislation was passed with only Democrats through a budget process. So it was not bipartisan in any way. Republicans have always hated the legislation. And so while I don't think that they'll try to undo the whole thing altogether, there is going to be a tax bill that will have to be done next year, next Congress, to extend or not extend the Trump tax cuts. And so that is a real opportunity for members of Congress who want to roll back some of those tax credits for clean energy and clean manufacturing. So that's something to stay vigilant for, but really appreciate the momentous win that it was.
Well, thank you very much, David. This was concise, succinct, as you said, and as I said, explain something that's pretty complex in simple terms for us so that we can activate our action.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you're doing out there. As I said, it is really important to have, real people talk to their members of Congress and elevate these important issues. So I really appreciate it. I'll put my email again in the chat in case anybody has further questions or if we can be helpful for anything.
Oh, thank you. Great. Yes, we're real people.
Thank
Not
you.
bots. No bots here.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your participation tonight. All right. So we're going to have our action at the end of the meeting, but I had a few words to say about the Omer. First, for the last 4 weeks, we've been counting the Omer, as Nate reminded us, and the Omer counting is a kind of Jewish Advent calendar. I think of it as that way. It's a 7-week adventure from the Seders of Pesach to the Revelation at Sinai. And thanks to our friends at IPL, Interfaith Power and Light, they put this very meeting tonight that you've come to and our website on their Omer calendar for today and tomorrow. So we've got some really great billing from IPL on the Omer calendar. So tonight our counting is on the cusp of the 4th and 5th week as we approach Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, celebrating the giving of the Torah at Sinai. We have an otter at the meeting now. Each week has a quality or a midah, if you're familiar with the midot, a quality of value, Jewish value. And the 4th week celebrates the quality of netzach, which is defined as eternity or persistence or perseverance, while the 5th week, starting tonight, invokes hod, which is the quality of glory, of splendor, of gratitude and magnificence. And I've been thinking this week of Jewish Earth Alliance 5th anniversary, that our work in climate holds our attention because it can be both a marathon, that netzach, persistence, and a sprint, that hod, glory. Sometimes the legislative slog is like molassesly slow, and sometimes the regulation comes out of the gate like a racehorse, unexpected. Gratitude and kudos to you all for both your patience with the former, netzach, and your quick response, hod, with the latter in this sacred work that we do together. So let's say the prayer together if you wish. Amy, if you could put the prayer up on the screen. Let's say the prayer together. We've got it in Hebrew and in transliteration. Baruch, this is the prayer that we say before we count each Omer. And I know we're a bit early for California, but it's nice for us all to be together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu Sefirat HaOmer.
There.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with mitzvot and commands us concerning the counting of the Omer. And I add this special prayer tonight under the sad circumstances we are in right now. We implore you, dear eternal force of the universe, by your great power in your hands, to release the captives and to bring peace to all. And we count tonight as Hayom. Let's see, where is my in my Hebrew? Hold on. We count tonight's number, Hayom Tisha Ve'esrim, Yom Shehem Arba'a Shavuot V'Yom Echad LeOmer. Today is the 29th days, is 29 days, which is 4 weeks and 1 day of the Omer. And let us say Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for counting that with me. So now I'd like to call on Elliot Rabe, and also from our steering committee, who is going to update us on the progress in our work on our action alerts, so that we know the comings and goings of our action alerts. And then Judy Burl-Fine will lead us in tonight's action. So please stick around for that. Hi, Elliot. Good to see you.
Hello. Thank you. So I thought I was going to get a slide, but I'm not. So let me just find that here. Here we go. Okay. So I think, first of all, I want to say that we can really celebrate that our actions and the actions of so many have helped to encourage our legislators and our government to take action and have borne fruit. So that's really why I'm here today. I also, can't help but mention that we have made progress, and I'll detail them in a minute, but there are also things that could possibly set us back in some of these areas. There's the Congressional Review Act. There's unfortunately the case in front of the Supreme Court, the Chevron, that is threatening to overturn the Chevron case and limit government's ability to enact environmental regulations. But tonight we're going to celebrate the good. So in January, we took action by sending letters to Congress to protect environmental programs. And what happened was that the Congress came through and raised the budget significantly for the EPA, $1.9 billion over the prior year, as well as the Department of the Interior, $2 billion over the prior year. Yay. The second
Fireworks.
One. In February, we took action sending the EPA comments supporting regulations on methane. And this was mentioned by our speaker. The outcome was the EPA has indeed finalized rules for the methane emissions reduction program with the waste emission charges. Yay! So that's, vital to make sure that this really devastating greenhouse gas is now kept under wraps. In March, we messaged the EPA again on power plants. And as we heard also from our speaker, the EPA has passed 4 new regulations setting pollution standards for coal and gas-fired power plants. Woohoo! And we heard, even though that was, it took many years after the Supreme Court tanked Obama's regulations, we did it. We came around and put, needed caps on these greenhouse gas climate killers. So we're making great progress, and we just have to keep up the pressure and work with our Congress folk as much as possible to to do all we can, and our efforts are succeeding. So thank you all for our
Great, Elliot.
collaboration.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad that you made a point that we need to keep people apprised of that their work does have some short term and sometimes it's a much longer term. That Netzach and Chod, marathon and sprint. So thank you very much for pointing all that out. That's terrific. All right, Judy Burlfine, will you lead from Encinitas? Will you lead us in our action alert tonight, please? Hi.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all ready to take action since we took action before, and we've been so successful. And sometimes it's hard to do it alone, so that's why we're going to do it together here. So here's our beautiful world. This is actually a photo from our land up in Canada, where we are doing our best to protect the land, air, and water. But let's get into some more specifics. Amy, with the next slide.
You mean you have a place up there, Judy?
We do up
Oh.
in British Columbia, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, but it's also hit by climate with trees dying from beetles and fires, and can't really escape anywhere anymore. But the EPA, as we learned tonight, has issued several new regulations. These will limit soot. For those of any of you who have spent time in Los Angeles many years ago, having clean air is quite amazing. I grew up there and it was very smoggy when I was young. So in addition, regulations are charging fees for methane release and cracking down on tailpipe emissions, which also cause smog, and preventing toxic byproducts from contaminating our land and water. So we want to make sure these regulations continue, are enforced, and clean up our land, air, and water. And this is how we're going to do it. Next slide. Okay, so if you've been here before, you kind of know the drill. We're going to write to our senators while we're on the call, and then right after the call, I hope you'll go ahead and contact your representative as well. You can do it on the website or you can call. If you're new, the way you find your senator's website is their last name, .senate.gov. If you're in California, padilla.senate.gov. So why don't you go ahead and open a new tab in your browser and pull up your senator's website. And I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll talk a little bit about the message. And if anyone has any questions, you can unmute and I can explain further. See everyone looking closely on their computers. Okay, so the message that we want to convey is to oppose any Congressional Review Act legislation that overturns EPA regulations. We really want to support recent EPA action because the goal of those regulations is to reduce pollution of our air, land, and water. And ideally, you will include one sentence in your message about why this is personal. Just like I said, I grew up in LA and the smog was terrible, and now it's much better because of EPA rules. Think of something that's personal for you and why this is important to you. So go ahead and write your message, and once you get it done, let us know in the chat so we can cheer you on, and then write to your second senator, and then write to your representative. And we're at 5 minutes before the hour, so I'll give you a few minutes, and then what you don't finish during the call, you can finish after we hang up. Susan, looks like you have a question.
This is the same action that is on the Jewish Earth Alliance website.
Yeah, yes, correct. Thank you, Mirala, for putting the text in the chat. And Mirala's placed a wonderful message in the chat where she adds her personal reasons as a Jew for writing. Okay, if you've done one, put it in the chat so we know you're making progress. Thank you, Mirala. And Bill and Joanna. It's great. Great that we're making it to states beyond the 5 top Jewish states. Thank you, Elliot. Well, we are hitting the top of the hour, so I understand that some of you may have to go. to
Yes,
work.
hi. Yes, let me come in and just say thank you to all of our participants, our speakers, and all of in attendance. Thank you to all of my steering committee people who participated tonight. And I hope that you all have a peaceful evening and a fun Memorial Day weekend. I hope the weather cooperates for us. And we will see you again next month. Blessings to everyone. Blessings to all you activists and advocates, and welcome to the new people who came to our meeting tonight. Lila Tov. And if you'd like to stay for a few minutes afterwards, you have any further questions, I think a couple of us will stay on.